every spooky movie has random trivia. And here at Trivial Theater, I explore some of these movies, and the random circumstances that make them the scary creations that we love. It's spooky month here at the theater, and we're hitting some kind of obscure horror flicks that rank as Halloween musts. This week we're heading back in time to a movie that originally came out in 1933, but has spawned remakes as recently as 2005. But I gotta tell ya, the original is still my fave. This is The Mystery of the Wax Museum. We start with the fact that this movie is in color. Not a totally unusual thing for that era, but certainly a thing of note. In 1921 London, which was apparently a great year for rain, we meet a ton of wax figures, who really enjoy pointing. Follow that up with a great set of boobs and a good set of hands, courtesy of Dr. Igor, who is met by a set of financiers who appreciate his work, which looks incredibly realistic. After realizing I want someone to look at me the way that Igor looks at his creations, we find out that he has a special place in his heart for his Marie Antoinette. She's given what feels like an incredibly long close-up, which means the actress playing her really had to hold her breath, while these dorks gab. That in mind, I just imagine someone walking in on this discussion would be a little weirded out.
Oh, yes, of course. You would say that. You always told me so, of course.
As per usual in movies, when good news comes, something is bound to spark a bad situation. In this case, it's Igor's partner who's fired up to cash in on an insurance policy by burning down the museum. They really light things up, which leads to Igor going out in a blaze of glory. Luckily, despite everything, Marie's dress is still fire. Is it weird this whole scene gives me Raiders of the Lost Ark vibes? Anyway, people start losing their heads as the building falls to pieces, and we get the strange paradox of lots of fire inside and lots of water outside. We jump to 1933 New York City, just in time for New Year's, and it's good to know that the crowds don't change in the way that they celebrate while wearing cringy hats. We then learn that a glut of confetti is as bad as snow for dangerous driving conditions. Reporters chase down information on the dramatic death of a young starlet, and then we're met with a rising corpse and smart-ass morgue attendants.
Ain't that just like a woman? Always have to have the last word.
A creepy dude shows up and proceeds to shop around for the body he's always wanted. Honestly, this whole scene feels like a missed opportunity for shadow puppets. We're treated to a line that clearly inspired Tommy Wiseau's classic phrase,
"Anyway, how is your sex life?"
Hello, sweetheart.
Oh, hello.
How's your sex life?
and an early 30s version of an OnlyFans account makes an appearance. As reporter Florence checks on the details of this untimely suicide, we learn the body of the young starlet was taken, and the morgue assistant gives us a thesaurus-style rundown of what happened.
Just that, it's vanished, gone, disappeared.
We get a great series of puns from Florence and her editor.
They're pretty stiff. No dope, not drunk, dead.
A cow does that and gives milk besides.
They go on to have some playful banter, but I'm distracted by the creepy guy in the corner. Once again, it's good to see that post-New Year's Eve cleanup was a bitch even in the 30s, and then we're introduced to the exotically titled London Wax Museum. And gasp! Dr. Igor survived mostly intact. Unfortunately, he suffers from severe hand envy.
If I had those hands of yours, I would show you the meaning of what you are trying to do.
Luckily, that drops away when his latest wax figure shows up. Of course, there's nothing sketchy about that or the sculptor. Elsewhere, we catch up on a workout in heels, where there's some 1930s-style banter.
All right, you raise the kids, I'll raise the roof. I'd rather die with an athletic heart from shaking cocktails and bankers than expire in a pan of dirty dishwater.
And then a shoe is thrown. Florence and Charlotte venture to the wax museum to meet up with Charlotte's boyfriend, Ralph. But it's Dr. Igor, not Ralph, who can't take his eyes off her. It turns out she's the spitting image of his Marie Antoinette. Of course, that has no bearing on later events. Florence's eyes are drawn to a different body, but not just any body. The Joan of Arc figure that bears a striking resemblance to the recently stolen corpse. Later at the Wax Museum grand opening, Igor lays out a history lesson. Florence does her own research into the Joan of Arc figure and finds a suspicious body tag, which is later pickpocketed by a cheeky bastard. She digs further and runs into a frog, as well as evidence of some fuckery involving a crate. The cops come in like a wrecking ball, but a massive psych is pulled, which leads only to a crate full of bootleg liquor. At the same time, Charlotte arrives to meet her boyfriend, but unscrupulous eyes are on her, both on an apparent wax figure and in a set of wax busts. Of course, her sense of danger doesn't go off, as she searches deeper for her man inside the museum. Igor's intentions for Charlotte become clear as he begins monologuing.
Help me, my dear. You helped me to give back to the world my masterpiece.
And she stands there just a few seconds too long. Help appears on its way, but then it's held up by parking in an illegal space.
You can't park here. Get it out of here.
Okay, brother, okay.
Igor seems to overestimate the longevity of a wax figure.
I have no desire to hurt you. You will always be beautiful. Think, my child. In 1,000 years, you will be as lovely as you are now.
And then Charlotte beats his face off. We get a classic horror scream that hurts Igor's feelings, but draws in much needed help. Igor kicks Ralph's ass and proceeds to get a still living Charlotte ready for a scalding wax bath. The cops show up and shoot Igor, who takes a swan dive into the wax. I'd give him an 8 out of 10 for style, but just a 2 out of 10 for technical proficiency. Charlotte is saved from the only kind of hot shower nobody wants, and Florence publishes her story, all while getting even with her tough-talking editor by agreeing to marry him. The Mystery of the Wax Museum stands as a pre-code film, which put in the simplest way means it didn't fall under a set of rules that were later implemented regarding decency in cinema. These rules restricted certain portrayals of characters and situations, and what could and couldn't be shown or implied on screen. For instance, Florence's brashness and relaxed talk of sex and relationships would have been severely limited if this had come out even a few years later. In fact, the 1950s remake removed all drug references and turned a junkie into the then more accepted role of an alcoholic. Mystery of the Wax Museum starred legendary actors Lionel Atwell and Fay Wray, and was directed by Michael Kurtzis, who directed Casablanca, Captain Blood, Mildred Pierce, and White Christmas. As mentioned above, the Mystery of the Wax Museum has been redone a couple times. 1953's House of Wax starring Vincent Price, and 2005's version of the same name starring Alicia Cuthbert, Chad Michael Murray, and Jared Padalecki. Despite the differences, all versions can trace their roots back to an unpublished short story called Waxworks. Most of the time, color movies are associated with a certain era, but you can go all the way back to early silent movies and find color being used in a variety of techniques. This one used a process that combined red and green dyes to get a limited spectrum of colors. Color at that time was considered by some to be a novelty and a tad frivolous, the same way that 3D can be seen today. Incidentally, the 1953 version did use some 3D effects. The use of Technicolor required extremely bright lights for filming, and being incredibly hot, they melted the wax figures, which had to be replaced by actors standing incredibly still. Like the color process, a lot of the cast and crew, and even the opening theme were reused from another underrated classic called Dr. X, a movie well worth checking out. It's not a perfect film. The Wax Museum and the horrors therein are almost more of a side plot to the melodrama that goes on for most of the movie. In fact, the action literally doesn't kick up until the last 10 minutes of the film, and honestly it feels a bit rushed. The film also just kind of ends, which wasn't unheard of at the time, but it still kind of leaves you wondering if something was lost over the years. Everything considered, the 1953 version does what the 1933 version sets out to do in a much more concise and complete way. Despite these points, I love the way that the 1933 version approaches a lot of the ideas, and the Art Deco set was definitely epic enough to back up the idea of a crazy man who turns people into wax figures. The reveal of Igor's scarred face was really well done and incredibly interesting, and Florence's brashness added the necessary spice to keep this one really enjoyable. Mystery of the Wax Museum isn't terrifying, and in some ways I'm not even sure it qualifies as horror, but it still holds a special place for me as a Halloween must-watch. The Art Deco styling, the implied gruesomeness of the subject matter, and the technology it employed are all things that I just love. Although not an easy find, this and the 1953 version are well worth looking into. The 2005 version, although not my fave, is a fun ride too. So what do you think? Suggestions for movies, trivial questions, comments, ratings, and a wax figure of Voltaire, of course not made from a human body, would be appreciated. Thank you so very much for watching.